Our speaker today, Jennifer Michael Hecht, spoke for us a couple years ago when her book came out, The End of the Soul. The End of the Soul, right, The End of the Soul. I was depressed for weeks after that book, Jennifer. It was so, no. What? No soul. Interestingly, her book, Doubt, really is a history of what we do. It's a history of skepticism. That's what we do. We're doubters, in a way, I suppose. And I had never really given much thought to the definition of skeptic until Steve Gould wrote the foreword for my book, Why People Believe Weird Things. And he basically defined it out of the Oxford English Dictionary. And I thought, I've never even looked up what the definition of the name of our magazine is. I thought I really should do that. And actually, there's a lot of interesting definitions, but it's mainly a thoughtful inquiry. It's just a thoughtful way of thinking about different claims. In our case, that thoughtful way is science. It's the scientific method using reason and logic and evidence all wrapped up. And of course, there's a long history of that dating all the way back to the ancient Greeks. So Jennifer has kindly written basically a history of what we do, so I don't have to do it, thank you, because that's really important. And in a way, she is sort of the bard of skepticism, our storyteller, the person that put the whole story together for us in one volume. So in addition to The End of the Soul, we now have Doubt, a History, which is done very well. It's a terrific book. It's a wonderful narrative. And she's also a poet. In addition to having a PhD in the history of science, she's also a poet. And she has a new little one that she's brought with her. And anyone who dyes their hair pink, I swear, has to come to the Skeptics and give us a good talk. So with that, please help me welcome Jennifer Michael Hecht. Put it in your pocket if you want. There you go.
Okay, great. Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming. It's true. Last time I was here, I was about 2 weeks pregnant, and now I have a 13-month-old, so it's easy for me to know when I was here. This book that I wrote, well, first I'll give you a little story about who I am. I started out intending to be a poet and knowing that that doesn't really pay rent. I thought I would be a professor, but I thought I wouldn't do the same thing, garbage in, garbage out problem, so I figured I'd be a historian. It was something that interested me, and I thought I would study the history of poetry and write it up in that kind of way, do cultural history. I got my PhD at Columbia, and every year they said they were going to hire a cultural historian, and every year we interviewed some, and they never did. So luckily, there was a wonderful historian of science there, and I found that history of science has an awful lot of the same kinds of deep connections and strange swerves that the poetry ideal has, and I really fell in love with it. And that's when I wrote The End of the Soul, which is about a bunch of late 19th century French anthropologists who were so interested in proving to the Catholic Church that the soul doesn't exist that they dissected each other for 30 years as they died to find brain morphology relationships between character and ability and personality. The only brains they could get their hands on were people they didn't know. And so they figured, well, we know each other. And since they were older when they made this pact, they started dying off. Broca's brain was the first one. Paul Broca's one of the more famous. He's the first person who actually found a relationship between brain morphology and personality. We still call it Broca's aphasia. The third left frontal circumvolution has a lesion on it. You don't talk right. And that was the first time we figured out, we can put something together like that. And these other anthropologists thought that they'd find simple things like that. And they never found anything else at all. They really turned this into a secular version of Catholic last rites, with a materialist deathbed scene and the proclamation about how they were dedicating themselves to science and would thus live on. And this project was so interesting, and there I was looking around for the general history in which I could place this very historically specific story. And there was no general history. That is, we all know there are some histories of atheism out there. It's just that they get so passionate about their subject that often you get the feeling that you're being carried along on this kind of faith in no faith, and you're not really sure if you can trust. That is, I wanted one I could trust. And when I would find an atheism quote and look it up, and it turned out that the person didn't seem to be really saying that, I could be careful about it. I could make sure that I put together a compendium that answered that story for me. I knew as a historian that there was doubt everywhere. Because in order to get a PhD, you study all sorts of different periods. And whenever I would study someone who was thinking very deeply, spending their whole life thinking about a 5-year period or something, or a small place a long time ago, doubt was there. They were never shy. They were talking about a small place. They knew they weren't threatening anybody, and they would talk about their doubters, atheists, agnostics, questioners, heretics, in this kind of way. Whenever anybody gathered the information together and tried to tell a more general history, these people fell out. I don't know how they fell out. They fell out differently each time. Sometimes Tom Paine got religious. Sometimes you had just left Ingersoll out. But it was always that it just didn't show up in the big story. And so I thought that I was going to be telling a story that historians knew the details of, but we'd never put it together. And I was quite shocked at instead finding a very cohesive story that has been self-aware and that we have forgotten about. That is, I found histories of doubt in every century in the West and in several periods in the East. Histories of doubt, people who sat down. Well, here, the thing is, take someone like Epicurus. Well, he's the one to take. Epicurus, he gets some ideas from other people around at the time, Democritus, sure, with atomism, but he's the one who really says, I think that religion might be causing us more harm than good, and he sets out secular versions of things that are now under contest, but that were always doubters' doctrines. For instance, atomism. Epicurus wasn't a physicist. He was looking around and saying, I don't think the gods made the world. It seemed silly to him. He said, if the gods didn't make the world, then what? And Democritus had already suggested the idea of atomism, which the first time I realized that, was told that, I thought, well, that sounds awfully supernatural if you can't see them or can't build a cyclotron to in some way find that these things are there. But it really isn't. The more you look at it, the world morphs into being. You see a tree sprout, and then its fingers stretch out. It's just our time that slows it down. And then you see a bud, and then you see an apple morph into being, and then it rots back out of existence, and the tree starts to dry out a few 50 years later, maybe. And then the world is like dunes made out of sand. And when you start asking yourself what it is, if you notice that it flows, that's one way of noticing the idea of atomism. The other way is, the example I use in the book is a herring. For some reason, whenever I need an example, a herring comes to mind. And if you take a herring and you cut it in half, 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 do you eventually get something so small it ain't herring? If you do, you've invented atomism. Something is a building block that puts together other things. So that atomism was not something that people were throwing around in order to understand the physical world because they were physicists. It was something people were throwing around for the last several millennia because they needed an answer to, oh, well, I don't really think so. I don't think the God thing, so then how? How are we here? And Epicurus writes it all up beautifully, but Lucretius does this wonderful job of describing how the atoms might have bounced together, fallen into repeatable patterns that then repeated, because that's what would happen. I mean, if you were to throw random things into a room and shake it up and settle it, whatever was balanced on top of each other in a certain way would be more stable. That is, it makes sense. The next time if you shake it loosely, whatever has already found a system is going to be more stable and make more systems like it, because of the same way oranges stack up when you put them in a pile. There's something natural to the system that then repeats. And once the pattern repeats, you're off and running. And this is Lucretius, this is Epicurus. They were already having these kinds of ideas, including ones for generating life and ones for generating consciousness. Epicurus, I just wanted to sort of mention at the outset, atomism as an answer to, is the world spiritual, supernatural and godly? Atomism for that one. Evolution. Look, every time we leave something and forget to clean it up, some bananas and some mush and some apples, something comes growing out of there. You leave some meat, out comes maggots, right? We know that putrefaction makes life. They weren't even wrong, just wrong scale, right? I mean, on some level, heated jets from the inside of the Earth right now seem to be mashing the amino acids together, and you get the first kind of sparks of something not unlike a crystal, but just a little bit more self-fussing. Atomism, evolution, yes, putrefaction, slime, they always use those words. Some kind of disgusting rot could easily have generated life and then us, because we see that sort of thing go on. We live in a pretty antiseptic world with concrete, but the idea of the forest regenerating itself because of rot just wasn't that obscure. Cosmology. They look up and they say, Bruno is borrowing it from Epicurus when he says, if this world is a chance and atoms, there are more of us. There are more worlds out there. And Epicurus says it beautifully, and Bruno quotes him just as they march him off to the funeral pyre, hand him a cross, which he throws back in their face. He was a hoot. Bruno manages to get himself excommunicated from like 5 different churches. He still dies young. So you really have to get on that if you want to beat Bruno. And psychology. Psychology was often understood in terms of gods, in terms of the supernatural, in terms of daemons, in terms of all sorts of things that we don't even think about anymore, that were all around us all the time. And it makes sense. We've all fallen in love with the wrong person, or found courage when we didn't know we had it in us, or found cowardice when we wouldn't have imagined we would do it, or lied suddenly and thought, well, why did I lie about that? And what they used to say was that a god had come by and given courage or given cowardice, that there was that kind of relationship. And I think it makes an awful lot of sense. It makes more sense than ignoring the question, actually. But nowadays, when we think about the question, we think about it in terms of the idea that the brain has several levels. We don't have to use Freud's terms, but if you are always late and you don't want to be, that's clearly in your control. Some other level of your brain is mad about being on time and not letting you do it. Something of that nature seems to be something that we chat about rather casually. The idea of a secular psychology was just as sort of difficult and amazing and important to create as a secular version of atomism and evolution. And Epicurus, once again, is just so brilliant. He says, stop worrying. We're not here for any reason. It's a little tough, but it also means this is all for us. It doesn't matter what happens. We just have to be nice to each other. If you want to have a good life, you got to remember, friends, don't worry about competition. Now, almost all my famous great people say don't worry about living on, and look at how they lived on. So I have to ask myself about them, but still, they are saying that we have to calm down. One of the 3 big things he says human beings are afraid of is pain. He says forget about pain. You always cause yourself more worry, more pain in the worry. Just forget it. It might not happen. And when pain comes, he says, when it's long term, it's usually not that bad. And when it's short term, it'll be over in a minute. As far as I know, he didn't have any babies, but okay, fine. Have a little chat. Okay, so another one, forget religion. He says the gods, look, if there's anything that's real, after all, people have been dreaming about these gods for a long time. He was as convinced of them in his culture as many people are, well, there's got to be something. He was just convinced of his multivaried bunch of gods, which frankly I think is the most important object lesson for skepticism. It's just history. Just go back and see how certain other people were. Even when they doubt every facet of something, the culture just really molds you. And so he thought, well, maybe there are a bunch of these gods, but they didn't make us, they're not supernatural, they don't really know we're here, they're in between several of the universes floating, little shapes of atoms, and that's all they are. And the only reason they're any good to us is because they're so calm, we should use them as a model and think of the calm, floating gods, and that's it. These gods have solved the problem of mood, and that's all. They haven't solved the problem of life after death or the meaning of good. This is just for calm. And he says, obviously, you can't be scared of these. They don't care. They don't know you're here. Maybe deal with that. Just get used to that, and you'll be fine. And forget death, of course. That's the easy one. He's just charming as hell about that, look, you're not going to be a little bit left behind to notice that you're being left out of all the cake parties. You won't have any cake, but you're not going to know about the cake, so you're okay. And when you follow that further, I really think it gets to everything we need to know, which is that We never, ever fully take advantage of any moment we're in. I think that when we want more life, we should remember to look laterally. If you're really enjoying the moment you're in, then you could start to worry about what's going to happen tomorrow, but you won't if you're really enjoying the moment you're in. So it's not the kind of lesson you can learn for good. It's the kind of lesson that you have to exercise all the time. And when you feel that fear of the end, remember that there's way more right here, and that's all you ever have access to. Indeed, in reality, that's all that is for you. When the door shuts. So this is the whole thing, and anything else is a fantasy, so you don't have to worry about it all. So there you go. And I found Epicurus quoted decade after decade, century after century. Like a decade after Gutenberg prints out his first Bible, Lucretius's poetic summary of Epicurus's ideas come out on that same machine. There's as much of a strong, cohesive history of doubters who keep mentioning the same people. Epicurus is one of the great stars. Another of the great stars, interestingly, is from the Old Testament, Ecclesiastes. You read Ecclesiastes with fresh eyes, and you find tremendous, not only doubt, but skepticism. I'm not going to talk much about doubt here, because I thought one of the ways that I would narrow down the subject for today's talk would be to really talk about skepticism. Because I started to write the book with the idea of writing about religious doubt. But when I started to read about skepticism and see that there was no overall story that started from the beginning and took us to now, it was just so fascinating. So that went in the book too, and thus the girth. The story, right, so I was going to skip over Job, which is a great doubting story, but it's really doubting providence, doubting that there could be a fairness to this universe. The great point Job makes is, look, I had money and I gave to the poor, and God took the money away, and now the poor walk by me, and God made them poor. I was going to give him money, and he took it from me, so the only justice I see is the one I have. He doesn't say that right away, but when his friends keep pushing him, at first he's the model of, look, God gave, God takes away, fine. Nice Buddhist approach, whether or not you believe in God. Fine, I can deal. But when his friends come and say, this is meaningful, you must have done something wrong, that's when he starts to say, I don't think so, and the more he's pushed, the more he thinks about those things. Ecclesiastes is a doubter of religion, but also a skeptic. That is, he says, I don't think we can know anything. I don't think we can know anything. He's so similar to Epicurus in some of these ways that we often think that maybe they read each other, but we have no evidence of it. So maybe it's just the mood of that Hellenistic period that they're both coming out of. All right, that's the kind of background I wanted to give you about how cohesive this story was, how much I found that I wasn't telling a story that I had to sew together, but that century after century I kept finding, usually anonymously published, histories of doubt that went through, starting with Epicurus and Ecclesiastes and listing all the same people that I was coming up with, and having the same kind of, I mean, you can't actually read these books as histories of doubt now because they're so mired in their language and their concerns, and also there's so much, they'll take the most atheist part of Hobbes' essay and just stick it in the most atheist part of Spinoza's essay and put them out there, and yeah, so it's, for a modern reader, it's a little tricky. But I go through those and tell how they work out, and they're really incredibly charming, I think. How much people have recognized throughout history that you have to know your history or you can't have any pride. And I really believe, I'm a terrible optimist. I realize we're getting this on tape. One shouldn't make predictions. But I really do think that this country is much more, reasonable than you would think if you just heard the loudest voices. And I think that part of that is that even the most proud doubters are a little worried about how it's going to sound, how it's going to come off. And I really think that's because we don't have a sense of our history. And once you have a sense of your history, you can get really, you start to see things in perspective. And gee, the doubters seem to have a pretty good track record of scaring up good ideas. Atomism, evolution, cosmology, psychology, all the people who have been saying, I don't think so, so maybe how else should it work, have generated not only the doctrines that are scientific, but also how should we live if it's, that is, everybody else the religious people are also drawing a tremendous amount on the product of doubters who were sort of forced into coming up with something because they weren't going to say angels did it. The story of skepticism with a capital S is something else indeed. The story of skepticism, we usually start it by saying Socrates. He's the oldest oldest thinker that we could say, look, this person said, I don't know, but I'm smarter than you because you don't know, you don't know. And that's what he said that pissed everybody off. He was tried for atheism, though he said to them, which gods are you saying I don't believe in? I mean, he really wouldn't cop to it, but he also wouldn't say that he would stop saying it. And he was free to not drink the hemlock if he would just quiet down, but he preferred to make the point. He did not, however, say that there is no truth. He was a big believer in there being one. And it's just that he was awfully subtle about what that might be in terms of, he believed in his gut sense of good, and that good was real. And, I laugh whenever I see people trying to find these kinds of, proof of good. Well, good's existence is proof enough for me. There it is. And so he really is arguing against people who are saying everything's relative. He's saying, no, it's not. And I think it's very useful for us now because we are in a conundrum right now. For example, how the Near East deals with gender relations. Is that our business? Is that a moral question that we can extend to the world? Are there absolute morals, or is the absolute moral respecting relativism? Socrates says there are absolute morals, and it's tough, but you can say that's a human rights violation over there, even though I don't know you people. And that's why life is so tricky, and we won't get bored. So Socrates does say he doesn't know, and he knows more by knowing he doesn't know. And he only asks questions, right? So he can get you to come up with it yourself. Here, I'll give you some Socratic questions. Did we go to the moon? Did we? Just say yes. Okay, what's the proof? Pictures, like Terminator 2? Melting into the ground. What are the proofs? The rocks. Oh, the rocks. Oh, those rocks. So if I were to get a collection of rocks together, anything? Anybody here know for sure which one's the moon rock, and so I had to have been to the moon to get that thing? No? So where's my proof? You all agree, right? We went.
The laser beam which gets reflected from the moon.
That we went there? Oh, that we dropped something? Yeah, that's actually pretty good. Well, skip that one. Keep going. Anybody here basing their belief on the moon and his laser beam? What else?
Told us so, and it feels good.
Government told us so, feels good. All right.
I saw the launch of 5 Saturn V's.
Okay, there you go. But if we have one person who told us that she saw somebody fly outside, anybody going with it? What I want to point out is that Socrates could make you say to yourself, I'm not sure, and then make you do that work of, why is it that we're all so sure? Oh yeah, we're a big group, we have experts, we have other people who check the experts, and I've checked some of the things that the big group has determined, and this one smells, tastes, and looks like one of those that that feels solid. A big group that all believes in something is a very different emotional thing than a big group where there are a whole bunch of outsiders. But I don't care about the moon. I'm talking to you about how Socrates could make you start to think without saying anything. He could just ask questions until you started to say, wait, what was I basing everything on? And that was what he was mostly interested in, getting people to rethink the fundamentals. And so skeptic, yes. But we don't get a real skeptic until Pyrrho, who was born just a little after Socrates dies. And he says, I read too many philosophies, they all seem good, they can't all be right. That is a very sophisticated doctrine. You need 100 years after Plato and Aristotle you need time to have a whole bunch of different doctrines, all the pre-Socratic doctrines. All the earth is reducible to fire, no, it's reducible to air, no, it's reducible to, a chicken, okay, we got troubles here. So the idea is that skepticism could keep reversing itself. And Pyrrho said, let's just not say anything. He said the opposite of every statement could be asserted with plausibility, so we're out. Let's all go to lunch. His great student, and by the way, Pyrrho followed Alexander the Great to India, and we think he picked up some of this idea, this questioning that came, pick up the Indian feeling of doubt and oneness, and then mix that with the Greek, several hundred years of philosophy that's conflicting itself, and you get somebody who's ready to say, no, I don't know anything, don't want to know anything, can't know anything, you don't know anything either. Now, his student, Timon, who we often think of because Pyrrho was sort of a good boy and Timon liked to drink at a girl, and so we like to mention skeptics aren't necessarily, for a while, in any case, you get the idea. Timon wrote, I do not lay it down that honey is sweet, but I admit that it appears so. And that gets quoted right through history. Every couple of centuries, somebody mentions Timon and his honey. How it tastes sweet, but I don't know what about honey is sweet. I don't know if it's my senses bringing that, or if the honey itself is something. And that's something that when Locke finally gets us out of this mess, he's going to lean on Timon's honey a lot. Okay, I want to mention that skepticism is often called the academy, the academics, the middle academy. Just so you know, that just happened. Way after Plato has died, the leader of the academy becomes skeptic, that is, a skeptic takes over, and the academy stays skeptic. So Plato's academy becomes the house of skepticism, and that's why you sometimes see it that way. Carneades is arguably the best philosopher in the 500 years after Aristotle, and his contribution is that he says, yeah, skepticism, but we need to add in probability. We're here, after all. Let's make some guesses. Let's come up with some ways of thinking and talking, and he takes skepticism into that phase where you can suddenly be a very active philosopher instead of just a naysayer. He says some things that are so wonderful, it just boggles the mind that he's not better remembered. For instance, he diagnoses most belief in God as ataxia of the heap variation. So he says, we make a heap of things like, well, how else did we get here? And the beauty of the world implies intelligence. And people everywhere believe in God. They put those together and they seem kind of weighty. But he said, let's just take them apart. Just hold one up. How else did we get here? Putrefaction. The beauty of the world implies intelligence. We're part of the world and our brains decide this is beauty. Good for us, but I'm not going to make any large statements of truth on the basis of it. And people everywhere believe in God. Yeah, people everywhere are idiots. We all know that. You cannot base anything on what people everywhere know. People everywhere do all sorts of crazy things, and we know that. But they, when you have them together, they look very strong. But you take them apart. You take the heap apart. Another wonderful thing. He says true virtue requires flaws. There's no such thing as being strong against temptation without temptation. There's no such thing as giving of yourself if you are everything. There's no such thing as any of these virtues, of not drinking if you're not thirsty. There's just there's no way to find a God with all the good virtues without also giving him all the negative problems for him to overcome in order to earn those virtues. Seems good to me. Let's see what else. Also mentioned the intelligence at work behind diseases, poisonous snakes, and tidal waves. That's a problem. And he says, the Stoics had argued that God's greatest gift to humanity was the gift of reason, and Carneades pointedly asked why God had shown such partiality in the distribution of it. Now, I want to take you to our next great skeptic is Ecclesiastes, the author of Ecclesiastes, written around the same time as these other guys we're talking about. We think around 250 BC. And, you're familiar with these phrases, but just think about them again. Be not righteous over much. Great line to find in the Bible, right? Be not righteous over much. Neither make thyself overwise. Why shouldst thou destroy thyself? Why shouldst thou die before thy time? It's funny. He's saying, for him, these moral absolutes are not. He's saying, save your neck. He's saying that it's a really interesting book to find in the Bible. Under the sun, the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, nor bread to the wise, nor riches to the learned, nor favor to the skillful, but time and chance happeneth to them all. That is another strong statement that providence really is at work here. Here's how he felt when he first went out in the world and accomplished a great deal. Then I looked on all the works that my hands had wrought and the labor that I had labored to do, and behold, all was vanity and vexation of spirit. There was no profit under the sun. And I said in my heart, as happeneth to the fool, so happeneth even to me. This too is vanity. Then I beheld that man cannot find out the work that is done under the sun, because though a man labor to seek it out, yet he shall not find it. Though a wise man think to know it, yet he shall not be able to find it. And he says, who knows I want you to remember that he's the one with to every season there's the appropriate thing. And it's so moving to read this person so long ago saying, there's a time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace, a time to refrain from embracing, a time to get, a time to lose. It's wonderful, it's a very soothing, it's a very beautiful idea of meaninglessness becoming a meaning because it's kind of a human song. Sing it. And he says, for that which, about an afterlife by now is around. With Job, it wasn't even around. But for Ecclesiastes, the afterlife is around. He doesn't believe it. He says, for that which befalls the Son of Man befalls the beasts. As one dieth, so dieth the other. Yea, they all have but one breath, so that a man hath no preeminence above a beast, for all is vanity. All go unto one place. All are of the dust, and all turn to dust again. In our Old Testament, can't get better than that. And why did it get into the book? Why did it get into the great book of wisdom? Too wise to leave out. That's my theory. Okay, I want to tell you about the Carvaka, 600 years BC, my earliest doubters, the earliest people I found doubting. The Carvaka are doubting Hinduism. It's a very early Hinduism, but they say there's no karma, cut it out, you don't come back. They say if there were spirits without bodies, there should also be mangoes hanging in the air without trees, but there aren't. Things come from other things. Here's a quote, only the perceived exists, the unperceivable does not exist by reason of its never having been perceived. How can the ever unperceived, like things such as the horns of a hare, be existent? Don't know. I like these two. He's saying about all the people who fast and, in Hinduism and try it. Now, I think it's a great idea to do experiments on oneself. I think Buddhism's a good idea. I think Zen's a good idea. There are great histories of doubt, and I have a whole chapter on them. And I always tell everyone that the chapter on the Buddha took 3 times as long to write as any of the others because the Buddha kept convincing me not to do anything. And I'm not joking, it really did. So they say, they have this play, this Carvaka play that they have, and one of them says, how can fasting and exposure compare with the ravishing embraces of women with large eyes whose prominent breasts are compressed in one's arms? That's a very straightforward question. And later, but what prudent man will throw away unpeeled rice which encloses excellent grain because it is covered with the husk? That is, there's pain in life, the Buddha said, and so we must reject all these things. And these Carvaka, they're pre-Buddha, they're already saying it to the Hinduism. Okay, and yes. An opponent will say, if you do not thus allow any unseen force, the various phenomena of the world become destitute of any cause. But we cannot accept this objection as valid, since these phenomena can all be produced spontaneously from the inherent nature of things. Who paints the peacocks or makes the cuckoos sing? There exists here no cause excepting nature. There is no world other than this. And that's 600 BC. So that's the Eastern skepticism that joins. Now, I've yammered on for a bit, but I really want to tell you about Montaigne. He was really the one I thought that, this was sort of leading to Montaigne is probably my favorite skeptic. He just is so incredibly interesting. Calls himself a Catholic because he lives in Catholic France, and he decides he can't know anything, and so he'll go along with whatever everybody's doing kind of thing. But he's very clear about you cannot know anything. He says religion is custom. How could you not think it is? Everybody's the religion they were accidentally born into before they could think for themselves. They're all different religions. That's what he says over and over to himself. And he cites Lucretius and Epicurus and Cicero's wonderful On the Nature of the Gods, which is a terrific doubting text. He cites Socrates' teacher that men and animals were both made from a milky slime squeezed out by the heat of the earth. Yeah, probably. Here's another funny quote. Okay, this is the skepticism against knowledge, which the new book I'm writing is on happiness, because it just became, all these guys just kept bringing up so many interesting questions on how one ought to live, and also poking fun at wisdom. I love wisdom, but it's also very frail. I mean, you can be very wise and still want to drink a great deal of scotch. You can be very wise and not be able to pass an open window. You know, I mean, life is rough, and so how much is wisdom? Why do we prize it the way we do, and how does it work? And does it work for some things and not others, and shouldn't we delineate that? Montaigne says, what good can we suppose it did Varro and Aristotle to know so many things? Did it exempt them from human discomforts? Were they freed from the accidents that oppress a porter? Did they derive from logic some consolation for the gout? I love that one. They were famed for knowledge, but we have not heard for all that they had particular excellence in their lives. And then another dirty joke. He insets a quote from Horace saying, does the illiterate's tool stand less erect? Which is a fair question. You know, brutes can have a pretty good time out on an evening. So yes, he quotes Xenophanes, who's the one who says, you know, look, I think if horses and ox have gods, they're probably looking like horses and ox in their minds, and that's probably why we have this pantheon of Greek gods. And yeah, Montaigne says, yes, so why shall not a gosling say thus, I am the darling of nature? Yeah, you know, why shouldn't this little tiny creature think? And Montaigne plays with his cat a lot and tries to think, is this cat think I'm playing with him or he's playing with me? And but yes, I love this one of the cynics who say that you don't need good things, you should just forget living like a person. Cynic means dog. And the idea was to live like a dog. A dog has some values, love and loyalty and sleeping and eating and doing everything in public. And if you would just calm down and if you would stop trying to hold back the universe and death with your tiny little ambition and politeness and clothes, you could be happy too. If you pretend that you can build a house and meaning and make things and become famous or money or whatever, and you build your garden, then the hailstones can come. You can lose everything. You have worry. Then you have to make sure, did I act right? Did I do everything I was supposed to? But if you decide you're a doggy, and that's what he did. And he had tons of people, men and women, came and followed him and just sat out. And Alexander the Great came and said, were I not Alexander, I would be Diogenes. And Diogenes said, were I not Diogenes, I'd be Alexander. So you see, there's a little something. Alexander also comes up to Diogenes and says, he comes up to him in front of all his followers and he says, I'll give you anything you want. And it's a trick gift, right? Because Diogenes owns nothing and has a huge following for it. And Diogenes asked Aristotle to get out of his son, who's standing in his son. It's this famous, like, you know, he didn't like that. Okay. Oh yeah, the cynics. I was going to tell you that Montaigne tells this famous story of this guy walks by Diogenes washing cabbages, right? Because that's what you eat when you don't have anything. He walks by washing cabbages, and he yells out, if you knew how to live on cabbage, you would not pay court to a tyrant, which is where this guy was coming from. And the guy answered, if you knew how to live among men, you would not be washing cabbages. And Montaigne brings it up to say they're both right. These things there's no answer. There isn't a right way to live. There's all confliction. There's all conflation. We can't know anything. The cynics aren't right, and the one who pays court to a tyrant isn't right. It's not like that. I guess I have to stop some of these because there's too many, but you know, just that he says of beauty, the Indies painted black and dusky with large swollen lips and a wide flat nose. In Peru, the biggest ears are the fairest. Basque country women are more beautiful when they shave their heads, and plenty of other places. Surprised him. And he says, some people call Plato a dogmatist, other people call him a doubter. He uses the term. Yeah, he talks about how the sick don't taste things the same way the well do, and so how can we know for sure what taste is? He says sexual desire, you learn how much the brain will trick you, because you can be a perfectly reasonable person with a lot of ideas, then you decide you want something, and you come up with ideas to justify it, and as soon as you've got it, now you realize, oh boy, I made up a lot of stuff and now I'm in a lot of trouble. You have a new idea. He says, oh, I love this quote, "He who last night was invited to come to dine this morning, today comes uninvited, seeing that he and his hosts are no longer themselves. They have become others." And we all know it's true. How many times have you invited someone over and it's the next day and you no longer feel as strongly as this was the thing to do, but so that it's true, you actually are a new person. Again, and he says, look, "Has it not happened to me not once, but 100 times and every day to have embraced with these same instruments," his mind, "in this same condition, something else that I've just judged to be false? If my touchstone is found to be ordinarily false, is it not stupidity to let myself be fooled so many times by this guide?" Meaning his own brain, his own senses. And moods, and, oh, I love this one. "Some people believe things just because they resist the pressure and the violence of authority. In fact," he says, and this is an age where they're burning people, and you say it, you read it now and you say, well, I'd keep my mouth shut. I wouldn't want to get burned. But the more I looked, the more people really get pushed into these. Somebody really just keeps hammering at them in a way that you might also say, you know what, I actually, it's not what I thought, which was a lot of people who were foolish and acting in ways too out there than that people know it. Anyway, he says, pride or reputation has, quote, "sent some men all the way to the stake to maintain an opinion for which among their friends and at liberty they would not have been willing to burn the tip of their finger." Isn't that something? And he says this, he's read all the ancient philosophers. He says, the writings of the ancients, I mean the good ones, full and solid, tempt me and move me almost wherever they please. The one I am listening to always seems the strongest. I find each one right in his turn, although they contradict each other. The facility that good minds have of making whatever they like seem true, and the fact that there is nothing so strange but that they undertake to color it enough to deceive a simplicity like mine shows evidently the weakness of their proof. He says this in a lot of different ways, that there are too many great philosophers, and he deals with each one that he can't deal with separately, just knocks their head together. If there's so many, they can't be. And then he's in this position of not knowing, and he starts carving these wonderful skeptic phrases into his rafters. He liked to live among his words. He's got Ecclesiastes and Epicurus, all their words are carved into his rafters. And he's just mad that you're not allowed to say this. He says, why, since among the dogmatists one is allowed to say green, the other yellow, are they not also allowed to doubt? He just wants to know why. And when you really think about it, our culture also very much favors certainty. If you are sure, if you're in a group of people and you're not sure what to do next, they'll look around to find the people who feel the most certain, and then they'll pit those against each other. We saw in the election there was a tremendous taboo against being the kind of person who thinks things over, who might not be sure, who's waiting to find out. These are, the signs of intelligence. On the other hand, group behavior, we do tend to need something to make action happy. We are action happen. We're animals. If we don't do something, if we only think about it, we're going to be in trouble. So we have a lot that makes it make sense, that we would like certainty, or a good idea that somebody feels certain of to follow. But when you really take a moment and think about it, a state of uncertainty is a much more likely to be fruitful. And I think it's wonderful that Montaigne could think that through so wonderfully. His motto was "Seja," which is "What do I know?" with a big question mark. Let's see. He says the custom of their country and whatever doctrine they have come to as by a storm, they cling to it like a rock. That the people don't notice that other people have these ideas. Okay, I'm almost done with Montaigne. I'm just going to tell you about two other people quickly afterwards. But I just wanted to tell you these because I find it quite extraordinary that. Look, Montaigne lived in a time where so much of the world changed during his life. It's unbelievable. Copernicus and the New World. The idea that our entire intuitive sense of what's going on with our planet, sun goes up, gets up every morning, goes to the other side, and it's not happening. You feel anything moving here? Well, we're moving, hurtling through space. These ideas were incredible. It's really almost the first time we absolutely had to believe something that was totally counterintuitive. You see the sun come up, you feel the earth stand still. And we'd come to it by mathematics and by looking up with the telescope and by models, but it's amazing that we convinced every man, woman, and child that what we see and feel is not the case. He lived through that, and he also lived through a time where they found a whole landmass the size of the one they knew about before. Just listen to him. You would think that he would say, we are the ones who know something. The sky and the stars have been moving for 3,000 years. Everyone so believed until it occurred to Cleants of Samos, according to, don't worry about it, to maintain that it was the earth that moved, turning about on its axis. And in our day, Copernicus has grounded this doctrine so well that he uses it very systematically for astronomical deductions. What are we to get out of that unless that we should not bother which of the two is so? And who knows whether a third option 1,000 years from now will not overthrow the preceding two. I just think it's wonderful to see that in this moment, the level of the feeling of, forget it, this keeps changing. We shouldn't believe anybody. We have to remember how much our science changes. And he says, behold, in our century, an infinite extent of terra firma, not an island or one particular country, but a portion nearly equal in size to the one we know has just been discovered. The geographers of the present time do not fail to assure us that now all is discovered and all is seen. But he can't believe it. They found this, they can find more. Now, I'm winding down now. I just want to tell you that the history of skepticism as this idea that we do not know because our senses lie to us, and our mood lies to us, and our rationality lies to us. The senses, put a spoon in a glass and you see it break. It doesn't break. You know that. The senses give us information that you have to add thought to. The thought processes are changed by everything, trying to look good for someone, trying to get something you want. Being hungry can make you hate a movie. It's just, we're animals, And so we had really gotten to this sense with Montaigne. Montaigne has worked up his own skepticism just at the same time that all the ancient skeptics are being rediscovered. And the two hits the world really hard. And the church gives up and says, fideism, F-I-D-E, is just, it's like loyalty. And what they say is, look, even the ancients, and it was true, all those Cicero and Epicurus, they all said, you know what, to the extent that you need to, go along with whatever holidays they're doing in your country. It's good for you to be around people, it's good for civic pride, and you don't want to die. It was illegal not to in most of these places. So it was always, look, don't create a fuss, just hang out with us. And then we'll all go, and we'll do the thing, but then we'll come back here. It wasn't really about belief until Jesus anyway. That whole idea of belief had to come along after there was a whole culture of doubt. That story is in here too, and it's very interesting to see that religion comes first, right? I don't know what's going on, but the river looks like it has a lot of powers, and you might think in terms of that. It's a description of the world, that kind of religion. But once you have a 600-700 year history of doubt, and that's what Greek philosophy is, and then Roman philosophy, how do you then get a God with a mommy? Not a God that's out. The Greeks turn their gods who have mommies into a spirit out there that doesn't know we're here, but that started the first cause. The Greeks and the Romans really whittle it down till it's just an energy source or the thing that started something. They don't talk, they don't believe in Zeus. Nobody does by the end of So how did a God with a mommy and a tongue? Cicero's saying, your God has a spleen? Or does he just have an empty space for a spleen? If he's shaped like a person, are you saying he has bowels, or there's an empty space? And if he has bowels, does he not use these bowels? And why would a God? And then, so does this God get colds? Why, if he has sinuses? If he doesn't have sinuses, what's behind his face? Like, these questions had made anthropomorphism pretty silly. Like, people didn't really believe that gods had come down as people at all. And so then, I'd always wondered, how do you get Jesus out of that? And it was in a direct confrontation. That is, this is the first time that a religion is sold against doubt, accepting doubt and saying we are going to make a leap. You can check this online nowadays. Call up the Old Testament and the New Testament, search for doubt, search for faith. They bloom around Jesus. They show up around him. Before then, it's not the issue. Jews are all about doing the rituals. The Greeks and the Romans were also about showing up at the shrine. It wasn't proclamations of faith. Especially if you don't try to teach it to other people's children, you're allowed to believe whatever you want. That's what Socrates got in trouble for. That's what you get in trouble for nowadays. You can say whatever you want, but don't teach other people's children. The thing is, so by the skepticism of Montaigne and afterwards, there's so much skepticism that the church has decided that they're going to argue for God. The entire Catholic Church, but some areas more than others. France went in for it, big, whole Catholic France, that we cannot know that God exists. No proofs are left. There's no even suggestion of it. But we are going to believe because what are we going to do? We don't have anything here. Our culture believes, and our great philosophers from the ancient times told us to go along with whatever you do. So on the basis of that, the Catholic Church actually said, we've been told to take a leap and believe what we have. And that's what they were using, and that's what they were defending against Protestantism, which was saying we can think this thing through and come up with a better plan. And they said, oh, no, you can't. They used skepticism against Protestantism. The Catholic Church defends itself with skepticism. It's a riot. And then that's why Descartes comes out and makes his big splash. All Descartes is answering the question of skepticism, allowing us to get on with science. Descartes was at a meeting where skeptical fideism was being explained, this idea that we can't know anything and so we should just accept, but we also know we don't know. And at the end, everyone applauded, and Descartes stood up and said, well, actually, he just didn't applaud. And a cardinal came to him and said, why aren't you clapping? And he says, I can't base all faith on this cynicism, this skepticism, this nothing. And he said, you got a better way? And he said, I think I do. And he explained it. People got very excited. The cardinal paid for him to go off for a year and write this thing up. He was trying to be a mathematician, but he was like, all right, fine. So what you read in his work is, the Great Meditations, is he decides he's going to see if he can figure out if there's a God. And this is the way he does it. He actually says, he's decided he's going to do a project to see if he can know anything. They say you can't know anything. He's going to sit there. He's sitting in his dressing gown in front of the fire. And he says, perhaps I'm dreaming. Perhaps I'm not even dreaming. Perhaps I don't exist. Perhaps I'm an idea of a person sitting in a dressing gown in front of a fire. How do I know if I'm being fooled by all my senses to the extent that I don't exist at all? So he starts thinking about it. He says, I shall consider myself as having no hands, no eyes, no flesh, no blood, nor any senses. I shall remain obstinately attached to this idea. He really tries. Go home and try. Thing is, it's not as hard as you'd think. He says, the meditation, and the next day he writes, the meditation of yesterday filled my mind with so many doubts that it is no longer in my power to forget them. He gets himself so that he's a little having a skeptical crisis. He's not sure he's there. Now, he says, look, there's one thing I have something of. I am a thing, this is his quote. I'm not going to put my hands down, so I'm done saying his quote. I am a thing that thinks, that is to say, that doubts, affirms, denies, that wills, that desires, that also imagines and perceives. So it really is dubito ergo sum. It's, I doubt, therefore I am. That's what he's saying. He's thinking, therefore he says, look, if I doubt everything, I know at least I doubt. And that must mean something doubts. The Buddha would have said, no, only doubting happens. That's all we know. There's no I there, but no problem. You're a great crowd. The thing, am I not, this is another quote, am I not the being who now doubts nearly everything? That's Descartes. And what Descartes says is, look, if I can find this feeling that's so certain that something is thinking or doubting, I can extrapolate from that feeling to other things which feel as certain, and I feel that way about God. That's what the Catholic Church went with instead. They said that we do have knowledge. It's the same internal knowledge of thinking. Now, that's a hell of a leap. They're off there on their own without me. But he did figure out that he can say something, which is that I sense. And what happens later is Locke comes out and says, okay, if we don't know what the honey is, and we only know that I'm tasting it, let's forget about the noumenal world. Let's forget about the real world. And let's make a science on the basis of what our senses can reach. And if we figure out that a sick person tastes honey differently than a well person, let's figure out what's going on with the taste buds. Let's figure out what's going on with health. Let's figure out what's going on with sweet. Let's figure it all out so far as we can. And that's what led us out of that crazy, claustrophobic little corner of skepticism, where we can't know anything. Locke thought of the idea, let's figure out what it looks like to us, always remembering that that's what we're doing. And it lets you out of the problem. It just turns your back on the whole, oh yeah, but we also, the whole thing is just a bunch of protoplasms with skeletons on the inside and muscles so that we can retract our little, and we've been entirely designed by evolution for eating and reproducing, and there's no reason to think that these things that we've evolved for those can do truth. These are eating and reproduction senses that we have. These aren't truth senses. We weren't evolved in any way by anything outside that killed off the dumb ones, or the ones that weren't seeing the universe correctly. You can be smart and see the universe completely wrong if smart is reproduce and stay alive and don't let the lions catch you. Anyway. So the last thing I'm going to tell you is that skepticism starts to disappear with the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment decides what it's going to do is fight things that it doesn't believe, supernatural, not with we can't know anything, but with let's see what we can know. Guess what? Supernatural doesn't seem to fit in that. That's the definition of what we can know. So we're not looking at it, we're not interested. Science is what we can show, and faith is what we can't show by definition, so we're done. We're just going to not look at that anymore. So instead of fighting supernaturalism with skepticism, we're going to fight supernaturalism with science. We're going to just talk about what we got, what our senses can tell us about. And that's what science is. Just move away from the more philosophical question of how we can base all this knowledge and speak from where we are and see where we can get. And it's allowed us a great deal of predictability, which is what science is. If you can predict outcomes, that's what we call truth. And I just want to bring to your attention that agnosticism is a word that gets invented by Huxley in the 19th century because he's read some church skeptical fideism. That is, he read skepticism in terms of the Catholic Church, written by a bishop of the church from the century previous, and he becomes inspired by this idea that you can't know anything. And he doesn't take that extra leap and say, so I'll believe in God because I can't know anything. And he pulls it back and says, the thing that I think is important is that when Huxley picks it up, he only applies it to God. And I think that that's kind of nuts. I think if you're going to be a skeptic, you should be a skeptic in all ways. If you're saying that you're not sure, but maybe there's a thinking part of the universe, you have to be equally not sure there's a blue gorilla under your chair unless you've checked. And I don't want to hear it otherwise. It drives me nuts. If you need some extraordinary claims, need extraordinary proof. Otherwise, we don't gather them into the field of conversation. And in that sense, agnosticism seems to me that if it's only applied to religion, it's a little facile, and that perhaps we should even ditch the word and speak about skepticism, what we can know and what we can't know. Because if you can't know what's up there to the extent that you can say maybe the world is being run by a purple rhinoceros, if you're not sure, it could be anything, then you really should be applying that to that you don't know if your car has sunken into the earth outside. You're making lots of assumptions on the basis of a lot of good evidence. I say apply it upwards. Or don't, and then apply your skepticism downwards too. But that's where skepticism went until you guys came along, which is that the very modern meaning of skepticism seems to have diverged a little bit away from the secularist movement and said, look, let's talk about the nonsense that gets generated outside religion as its main question, things of how the magic of the society, between people being abducted or all sorts of claims that aren't substantiated or don't feel scientific to us. That's the meat and potatoes of a skeptics group like this, though you're also interested in the questions of secularism. Then there are secularist groups who have a little interest in the questions of skepticism. But I want to show that the two were always completely linked up until the 19th century, where taking on the challenge of being a skeptic, which is, it's a lot to say you don't know anything. That wasn't appealing to anyone in the scientific age. But Huxley read about it when he was thinking about religion and reawakened it just for the sake of religion, and that's your agnosticism. I think that that these things will rejoin to a certain degree. The more we know about what skepticism is historically, the more it makes more sense to talk about these things in tandem. I do want to just say one more thing before I close, which is that the next book that I'm writing is on happiness, and I'm writing it because I was shocked to see that the doubters throughout history have not been naysayers and negators, but people who have come up with all the positive ideas about how, not only the physical world, but how we should live. And the religious people have borrowed from them tremendously. And I was really interested in how we should live, especially the sort of bittersweet versions of it, where you do say, hey, you know, what does wisdom really get you? And to be honest about, you know, instead of just sort of self-help motivational, but to say, you know, how hard is life and what are its limits and these kinds of things. But one of the things that just keeps returning to my mind is that we now have nuclear families and the nation and the world, but this in-between section that is really where most of human life has always taken place is kind of gone in our modern world. And I think that groups like this, where you have a group of around 300 people that you see on a regular basis, that aren't your family, but that aren't the nation, that can be turned into political when you need them. The right has the churches. It's all set up. You don't have to sign in, you don't have to show up on a regular basis, but you get the messages, and everybody knows who everybody is. The left used to have trade unions. We have the universities still, but that's only 4 years. The kids aren't active because they're kids, they're active because they have a group, a meeting place, a place where you go casually and get sucked in, you can back up when you need to. Now all the left has is real political meetings that you have to be dedicated to, and a lot of us find that doesn't fit with the rest of our lives. I think that the idea of noticing how people get together, and especially when they get together on something which is themed but not very specific, it's not orchid growing. You guys have a lot of, I think that this is really where the future of the left, but in a lot of ways the future of the country. I think people have to look to this, and I'll be writing about large groups like this, sort of medium-sized groups in the next book, and I imagine I'll write a little bit about this one. So I just thought I would tell you that I think that the optimism that I keep coming back to is partially because I think you're doing the right thing, and I think it's an exciting time that's coming up. And I'll take questions and I'm done.
So please, questions for...
You want to? Or should I just, okay.
You mentioned that in the Enlightenment that science turned its back on religion in a way in order to proceed. And I was wondering today, because of the rather forceful and effective attack that fundamentalist religious people, right down to the Viennese cardinal this week, launched another attack on evolution. And it seems like they've isolated evolution particularly. To sort of force a dialogue again, almost, or to renounce science. I'm not quite sure what to go with, but I just wondered what your thoughts were on that.
Yeah, I think that the question is about the fight between science and religion, and how much religion right now, in particular, seems to be grabbing on evolution as the issue. I think this is another thing I'm thinking about a lot for the happiness book, because it can be so frustrating when the ideas that you feel are straightforwardly good are countered by a lot of other people, and I think that the answer is really to remember that I really believe that the fundamental thing that makes the world the way it is psychology more than other things. I do think that these fights are like sibling rivalries. They get up this anger there. It's about politics in the big way of politics. It's not about the issue of evolution. If it were, we would be constantly having cosmology fights. We would be constantly having biology fights. We have some, but it's about what we should do next. They're not arguing that it's not real. That is, certain issues get picked. They get picked for very specific reasons, and other ones go away. What about atomism? Textbooks going on about atomism? I think we should start fights on these fronts. I really do. quite frankly. I know this is a very hot topic, but I don't think I think I can do it without offending in any direction. The whole concern about abortion, look, nothing could be more tragic than a young woman who's really, we know what the argument is. I'm just saying, if we want to take a little of the heat out of it, take a deep breath and realize how many different ways there would be to help young American women who are perhaps living in a situation where they're not given enough information. There are tons of other ways, and if you just stop staring at the one hot button that we're all fighting over and think about educational grants, think about even, yes, I know, compromising with the people who totally disagree with you, if it actually gets the girls educated, guess what? Once the girls are educated, there's no problem anymore. They know where to go, they know what to do. So I guess what I'm suggesting is I think this is a turf war. I think it has all the issues of geographical and historical difference struggling, and it's because we're so close to each other. We are so close to each other that, like New York and New Jersey, we sneer at each other. We're all Americans, and we have all this fire against each other. When we really look at the larger picture, boy, are we alike in a lot of ways. That side might say it's a completely different thing than we do about evolution and about abortion, but they are still teaching atomism and teaching the girls to go to graduate school where they're going to find out the information they need, if not, they haven't already. What I'm trying to say is there is a lot that's shared, and I think that we torture ourselves more than we have to, and that we could be more effective if we stand back a little bit. It takes a lot of history to see it. Thanks, that's a good question. I saw a hand here, yeah.
Yeah, I've learned that some ministers in this country prior to the Civil War had declared that abolitionists were atheistic because they were going against God's rules that sanctioned slavery.
Also because a lot of them were. I mean, there was a tremendous contingent of people who went around giving free speech, free thinking lectures, women's rights lectures, abolitionist lectures, and stop missionizing the Indians lectures. The missionaries, you take the people's land and then you chase them around with a Bible. It was really mean. And people got mad about it. They would say, stop it. Don't go to this poor person's house who used to own this whole country and then try to get them to change this on top. There were a lot of people who did join those crusades altogether. But you finish your question, I'm sorry.
That's what I was curious to learn, if you had covered that in your book or in your research, of how abolitionists were, a lot of them actually were atheists.
Yeah. There are 10 chapters in the book, and chapter 9 is that doubt could change the world. That by the 19th century, there was enough of a critical mass that people thought that maybe we really are alone here, and the morality, the moral imperative of that came clear to a lot of people. If this is it, then we are the only thing that's good, and we better enact it. We better take care of ourselves. We better be what we wanted God to be. Generous and kind and big and there and present, see each other, witness each other. I saw a hand in the back. I'm trying to go by when I saw them.
How do you explain Carvacrol popping up in the land of the gurus and so on? There's one thing that really astounded me in your book. I see the secular philosophers of Greece developing this and the Enlightenment, but it seems like it's really out of left field.
I guess, yeah, I don't know. I guess I wasn't more surprised by them than by the pre-Socratic first philosophers who are also willing to say, hey, let's try to figure this out without adding in the supernatural. That is, there must have been a period there where people understood some things were supernatural, but weren't contesting them. Did they make the leap all at once? I don't know. It's really, where the leap comes from, I don't know. I just gave a blurb for a book called Unchosen. The book was written about Hasidic men and women who were trying to get out, or were getting out but lying about it. They were, the rest of the community thought they were in, but they were sneaking out. But most of them don't get out. They think they're going out, but what keeps them in is the tremendous amount of social pressure, even when they're real rebels, but they come back and fake that they're. And reading that for me it was a profound experience of watching people get a little bit of a kind of strict rationalism and then retreat from it. And I think it's a really interesting question. I think it's probably one of the most important questions for philosophy today to understand the relationship between these sort of scientific ideas and how we live the rest of our lives. I hope that helped, but it's.
What is the history of religious repression of scientific research, like is going on now with stem cells?
That's a good one. There's a tremendous history of it. Yeah, you know, from Galileo. You know, they didn't want to. The idea of sticking with what's there at the moment. There's tremendous pressure. The truth is, there's tremendous pressure within science to stick with what the textbook says because they don't want to have to revise the text. I mean, really, careers are made on ether, and the ether was kind of proved wrong for about 100 years before the ether dissipated, because people's careers were based on the ether. And it's clear, you see them die off, and then the ether talk stops, because it had been proven wrong. So it's not just that religion does it. We have all sorts of different cultural things that keep us in these little boxes. It's like trying to get off a globe by running on it.
I happen to be a doubter myself. I doubt that the Apollo missions happened. My question is, will you strike a blow for doubt and encourage this audience to come and look at my exhibit? I have an exhibit.
Okay, sit and I'll answer your question. If you sit down, I'll answer your question. All right, the man has an exhibit. Look at his exhibit. The problem is that I think the problem is I can encourage them to do it, but I do think that the basis upon which we've made these kinds of decisions, which is, look, I guess I think this, that capitalism is a conspiracy enough. You don't need a hidden one. Sorry, but I'm just saying, no, I understand that you're frustrated, but this isn't your lecture this time. So, but now the time will be yours. But what I'm trying to say is that I tend to believe that large groups of people do not keep secrets. It's very, very difficult for very large groups of people to keep secrets. Look, forever we didn't believe in contagion because we would have quarantines throughout the history of medicine. We'd put quarantines and it would spread anyway. And so we realized, oh, it can't be contagion. But it's just that some guard always wants to go home to his wife. It's just not, it's very hard for human beings to actually keep a secret without it coming out. And I don't think it's necessary for conspiracy to have that kind of secrecy, because I really do believe that capitalism is where the people who have power manage to manipulate the things that they want right in plain sight. So I'm not saying that no one ever dies for mysterious reasons that turn out to be something else. That is, there are conspiracies, but I really tend to believe that small ones are more believable than large ones, because human beings are gossipers and blabbers, and they tell.
You won't look at the evidence.
I'll take a look.
And besides, Kennedy said we were going to the moon.
Say again, I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
I said, and besides, Kennedy said we were going to the moon.
That's right, there you go. He's mad, it's okay.
And we did.
What you've studied thousands of years of world history.
Yeah.
You've studied the processes whereby thoughts have come from one place and gone to another. There's been changes. Using your crystal ball looking forward and the quote-unquote threat being posed by fundamentalist Islam, what conclusions can you draw and tell us where you see things going in the future?
I'll tell you.
Given the closed minds of the White House and the fundamentalist right-wingers.
All right, look, there's one way that I can answer this question, which is that when you study, or just read through this, because I was really interested in this, the way that the Jewish religion went from excommunicating a guy like Spinoza to singing his praises in the shul, the way that the Christian religion went from burning its dissenters to allowing its dissenters to start up separate sects and encouraging them, the way that these things happened because over several hundred years, tons of people were willing to stick their neck out. It didn't happen fast, and we only see a few Muslims willing to do it, but there are a few. It's a slow process. It's very slow. It takes about 100 to 200 years. And from when people start saying, look, we have to give women more equal say in this religion or they're gonna leave. They've got too many options now. That's what happens first. You've got to give women more options in the religion. So that breaks down one aspect of the hierarchism, which is what keeps the religion going. People on top want to keep it. So that's why they're so tight, because they're on top. So when you break down the hierarchy so that the religion will survive, by giving women more of a say so they'll do it, because otherwise they won't. So that's one of the first things. You got to get, when women get equal rights, the whole thing gets a little bit more loose, a little more secular, and that's what happened with Judaism and it's what happened with Christianity. Elizabeth Cady Stanton wrote a woman's Bible. She just took out all the bad stuff. She said Disraeli said there were several hundred errors in the translation. She said, well, I choose to believe they're all the ones that insult me and take them out. She's cute. The Jewish and the Christian religion both had to look at torturing people in order to get belief out of them. And they shamed themselves out of it. It took a couple hundred years to shame themselves out of it. It took a couple strong people having their lives and their careers ruined to shame people out of pain, physical pain, in order to make them do what they want. So that the broadest way I can answer that question is that I believe that Islam will go through the same process. I believe that the marketplace of capitalism requires public secularism so that we can all go to our separate mosques or churches or temples, but we have to be able to come together and go to the theater and to exchange goods and to know we're going to go home alive. And that the process that we live in does require, I've just said bad things about capitalism, now I'm saying there is a good thing, that it demands a secular public square where we have free speech. And I think that if the Muslim world is going to come into that world, they're going to make that same choice too. I do think it will take a couple hundred years, but if I had to loosely make a prediction, that's the one I would make, that we're going to see more and more struggle as time goes on, and that these are the changes that are going to make a difference. I think the last ones took a couple hundred years. That's the thing. We're all saying, where are the Muslims? Oh yeah, you go back to 15 this or 12 this and tell me where the Jewish one who was standing up for Spinoza was. It's not right there in the beginning. It comes slowly and then they build on each other. I'll take one more and then we'll be done.
It may not take that long. In Iran, more than half the university population is female.
Yeah, and I really do think that it makes a difference. Of course, if everything closed down right after you get out of school, it's tough, but I do think that that's a big thing. And I do think that it might not take so long because the doctrines are there. And when you do read Why I Am Not a Muslim, title taken from Bertrand Russell, Why I'm Not a Christian, Why I'm Not a Muslim, written under a pen name of a great Islamic medieval doubter, he picked it up. But he says in it, how can we not listen to all the secularism that the Christians and Jews realized? We should just apply it to our, that is, they are picking up on the work that's been done before, so maybe it will be faster. All right, thank you all for coming.